All right. Welcome back to Sister for Sister Story Time. I am your host and sister, her historian, ChayaFyah. We are reading today the e-booklet titled The Saturn Death Cult, the link between planetary catastrophes, ancient mythology, and occult ritual. The current chapter is on the Bronze Age man as God. If you'd like to get the book, the link is in the description box. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and donate to the channel. With the passing of the Silver Age, a search began for the perfect alloy of God and man. What was once the domain of mighty planets would now be the mythic and heroic exploits of the Bronze Age of man. It would be a time when conflict and war would become man's highest expression. A now comparatively calm cosmos presided over the dawn of the Bronze Age of man. For the first time, mankind could look up into the heavens and see a sky not unlike what we see today. Complacency regarding the movements of the planet started setting in, and man began to look within himself as a means of defining both the past and the future. The fear of doomsday shifted radically away from meticulous observation of the planets to a fear of bringing doomsday onto oneself via one's own actions. In this way, did the world see the rise of demigods, powerful mythical men and women whose destinies were considered independent of the will of whatever gods had gone before. The Golden Age meant little in an age where men came to believe they could be a king by their own hand. The warrior king now ruled and assumed the mantle of the bloods, whose power had been declining after the events at Babel. The age of war as the highest expression of man now held ascendancy, with art and literature embracing the theme of the individual's will to power as the essence of a new heroic age. However, Mars and Venus were going to have at least one last word on who really did determine the rise and fall of kings and kingdoms. Rivers would run red, locust storms would strip the land, frogs would breed like rabbits, and firstborn children would suffer statistically improbable rates of death. Worst of all, slaves would feel free to throw off their master's yoke, and an old idea of what constituted righteousness and justice would reemerge. Though a promising beginning for this new breed of blue bloods, the Bronze Age of man was not going to be a total picnic, those warrior kings who would be their own and everyone else's masters. Mars and Venus continue to threaten the Earth. The first clue as to what awaited the inhabitants of the Bronze Epoch could have been deduced from the fate of a little known city state that enjoyed a certain specialized agricultural monopoly. Courtesy of the rise of agriculture near the end of the preceding age of silver, some plants had been found to exhibit desirable properties other than nourishment. Though this would have been known at a local level for millennia, it wasn't until the advent of concentrated farming that the commercial potential of these certain plants could be realized. Chief amongst these was the now infamous poppy plant, a flower capable of transporting those who indulged in its juices into blissful myopic trances, free of all lingering doomsday anxieties. And the city state that enjoyed a monopoly in the cultivation and distribution of this highly addictive drug, Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah was in its day the Afghan opium fields, the Golden Triangle, and the British East India Company rolled into one. Its product was known as the grapes of Gomorrah, to others as wormwood, and a certain Jesus Christ would himself one day be offered its numbing comfort as he hung dying in agony on a Roman cross. Forget the stories of its sexual depravities and deviant proclivities. This town was an efficient drug dealing operation, second only to the CIA, and its market at the beginning of an increasingly immoral age of bronze was only getting bigger. Quite naturally, Sodom and Gomorrah's opium trade had proved remarkably recession proof in the aftermath of the Tower of Babel economic debacle. Under such circumstances, people just wanted to forget, kick back, and get out of it. Opium has a excellent capacity to help you do just that, and its addictive properties ensured a ready supply of willing debtors. Excuse me. A ready supply of willing debtors to the temple-based merchant bankers who had survived the fallout from Babel. Due to its burgeoning wealth and influence as a result of the trade of opium, Sodom and Gomorrah proved a robust economic model perfectly capable of stepping into Babel's shoes. It quickly became a magnet for drug traffickers and money lenders all over. One such trader and his friend, however, would soon find themselves unwilling witnesses to a new onslaught of interplanetary skirmishes with dire consequences for the now flourishing Sodom and Gomorrah economy. And what would be the beginnings of a series of terrifying reminders of what still was the most potent force in determining the future of mankind, Sodom and Gomorrah suddenly ceased to exist. In one night, the drug dealing capital of the Old Testament world was completely obliterated in a way that would haunt kings and paupers alike and scar forevermore the psyches of those who would do naughty things in public toilets. The trader and his friend, mooching about their business in and around Sodom and Gomorrah, were a certain Lot and Abram. Lot got out just in time thanks to a warning from Abram, who seemed to have had prior knowledge of what was coming down on the city. On the way out, Lot's wife unwisely took a look back at the reign of carnage annihilating the city and reportedly, as the expression goes, froze into a pillar of salt in sheer terror at the sight. A massive interplanetary arcing bolt of plasma vaporizing the earth clean at its white hot point of contact will do that to you. Or maybe it was the spectacle of an out of control Mars or Venus unexpectedly looming large in the night sky while indiscriminately pouring giant electrical flames on the earth that did it. In any case, Earth had just been given another reminder that Venus or Mars, I'm not sure which one for this particular event, still had the capacity to turn up at inconvenient times. The upshot was that Sodom and Gomorrah was gone, and warrior kings the world over now had a whole new set of problems to deal with, the least of which was that the various people under their control were demanding that they do something about it. But what to do? Enter our old friends, the priest kings, the original blue bloods. They had an interesting solution for these warrior king upstarts, a set of sexy rituals designed placate the angry gods designed to placate the angry gods that would consolidate power over the people. Except that they weren't sexy at all, because since the end of the Silver Age, these rituals had degenerated into truly frightening ceremonial gang rapes, complete with the sexual debauching of children and babies, followed by their actual agonizing murder. The Saturn death cult begins. They called it a kind of sex magic. Within the hidden secret societies and mystery schools from the previous age, the mythologies and legends recording the actual planetary events of the Golden Age had been distorted into literal humanistic dramas. These dramas were then to be physically reenacted out as ritual by those aspiring to own the legacy of Saturn's power and authority as creator. Under this scenario, you can pick out any number of warped sexual patterns within mythology and turn it into perverted sexual satisfaction masked as ceremony. 1. Old man Saturn takes young Venus as a bride in the midst. So on earth, the king takes a virginal or red child, priestess of Aphrodite or Venus, and has sex with her. Two, Mars is the warrior god born of Venus who rebels against Saturn and ultimately ascends to heaven to have sex with his mother. So warrior kings find themselves doing the same thing in defiance of their fathers. Check out King David's son Absalom in the Bible. Three, Saturn, under his Greek identity as the god Kronos, devours his own children. So human kings have reportedly done the same with human children, possibly even their own as the occasion demands. See the suspected antics of one Caligula. Four, Jupiter or Zeus determines to take Saturn/Kronos' crown by gutting him to release his previously devoured sisters and brothers from Saturn's bowels. Zeus then promptly marries his sister Hera. Naturally, earthly kings follow suit and end up marrying and having sex with their sisters. Moronic inbreed heirs ensue, and today we can see the legacy of this policy within our various political elites. And so on. Ritual sex act after ritual sex act, blood sacrifice after blood sacrifice, ritualistic act of cannibalism after ritualistic act of cannibalism. The Silver Ages need to record actual cosmic events as mythic records to ensure doomsday lessons would not be forgotten, was eroded into what became a sex ritual control mechanism. This mechanism could be seen as the first applications of shadow government-sponsored mind control programs. They were designed to reduce once proud warrior kings to the role of sex puppets in an insane attempt to imbue a supposed elite class of people with the authority of Saturn as cosmic lord and creator. Power politics on Earth had taken a nasty turn, even as the planets Mars and Venus continued to menace the population's existence. Detail from Rubens' depiction of Saturn devouring his own children. Some human kings have been accused of trying to emulate this act, though no real public evidence of this exists. It's almost impossible to contemplate what these blue bloods were thinking of with their belief that disgusting and perverted rituals could alter the physical courses of physical planetary bodies. However, it seems this toxic nonsense was now a worldwide phenomenon. Human sacrifice goes global. In the New World, the elites of the Amerindian nations practiced horrific variations on these same themes on the Great Stone Pyramids and temples still standing there today. Lesser American tribes, complete with their totem representations of the Axis Mundi as backdrops, did the same thing with the lesser resources at their disposal. The result was still a very unpleasant experience for their unfortunate victims. South Seas peoples routinely practice ritualized cannibalism as part of their royal and military etiquette, even up to within recent memory. The Phoenicians were notorious for their child sacrifices, revolting even the hard-bitten Romans by their practices. Even Israelite kings in the Bible reputedly threw their firstborn into fires in self-serving ritual acts of sacrifice. European pagans indulged in macabre human sacrifices of war prisoners and possible acts of cannibalism to mark cosmic events, while certain African tribes refined painful mutilation ceremonies involving child deaths. Detail from the Codex Magliabechiano depicting human sacrifice in the Americas. Enter the Hebrews. However, there was one class of people that didn't necessarily see the raids of Mars and Venus as the acts of gods, but, and here is the subtle difference, they rather viewed such cosmic events as the righteous manifestation of the one true God's anger and justice. On its next flyby, Venus was to give these people the impetus to break free from a state of national slavery and establish a nation under a one true God. The exodus of Israel out of Egypt would be marked by yet more cataclysmic events, resulting in multiple falls of once powerful warrior kings in a number of nations, most prominently that of Egypt, the kingdom born out of the arrival of refugees escaping the cataclysm that had sunk Atlantis at the end of the now distant Golden Age. The story of the Israelite exodus out of Egyptian slavery is replete with references to what can only be described as the effects of yet more cosmic interactions between planetary bodies. It's been postulated that the famous 10 plagues of Exodus and the parting of Red Sea were the physical gravitational effects of a close pass by Venus on its violent and erratic path to its present-day orbit. As far as the Israelites were concerned, the highly convenient approach of Venus was a result of divine timing on the part of their deity. They made no reference to the planet in their writings, only to the power of their god. Whatever one's take on the causes of the Exodus, the Israelite interpretation of events marked a full-blown revolution in the way people perceive cosmic upheavals as an expression of God or gods. Instead of attributing the actual bodies involved with godlike status, the Israelite way of thinking was to identify cosmic upheavals as evidence of a one true God's power. Under this interpretation, the planet Saturn was not the actual creator, but the tool of the one true yet still hidden creator. And so too were the subsequent actions of all the other planets involved in the great cosmic dramas since the Golden Age. The next leap forward in the Israelite train of logic was to conclude that the actual physical events in the cosmic upheavals of the Golden Age, as well as those in their own age, were actually nothing less than the one true creator's first actual communication or message to mankind. According to this train of thought, the physical effects of interplanetary upheavals were of no divine consequence unless one could discern and understand the intrinsic message being communicated by such events. Cosmic upheaval and interplanetary disturbances were now viewed as the divinely communicated word of the Creator or the logos of the Creator. The conclusion was simple and very monotheistic. Work out the message behind a series of essentially natural events, and you were effectively understanding and communicating with the Creator. You would subsequently be able to understand the Creator's motives and the Creator's objectives. Under this methodology, a careful observer of the consequences of the Creator's actions in nature could then proceed with the sure authority that they were acting in the best interest of the Creator's plan for the future of his creation. In essence, what the Israelites represented was a rediscovery of what the priesthoods at the beginning of the Silver Age had tried to institute through the careful recording as mythology of the cosmic events witnessed during the Golden Age. Stated again, through the construct of mythology, they had hoped to impress upon future generations an overall message with warnings on how to avoid another doomsday scenario. Ritual as validation of the elite. The warrior kings and the elites immersed in the performance of rituals, this concept of direct communication with the divine by simple observation and understanding of natural events was simply intolerable. They were the aristocracy of purpose, and their purpose in life was to perform rituals on behalf of humanity. Only through careful staged reenactments by chosen human representatives playing out the actions attributed to the gods could the path to true enlightenment and the comprehension of any hidden message be attained. The grander the ritual, the loftier the temple, the more likely you were to experience its hidden message. The expense of this alone meant your average Joseph didn't have a hope in hell of staging a ascent to enlightenment. And that's just the way the elite liked it. Enlightenment was not something to be taken lightly, and it certainly shouldn't be available to the great unwashed. You simply could not have a whole nation of people thinking they were able to make individual judgments based on the simple observation of events or the study of written reports on such events. That would mean everyone would have the potential to understand the motives and plans of the supreme creator. Who would be special and elite then? No, slamming on with ever more complicated and outlandish rituals was the only way to seriously maintain the true path to Golden Age type enlightenment. And the best way to do this was to ensure that every nation adopted the warrior king model of elite government for and by the elite. Guy in charge was the only acceptable order of nature in the minds of those elites who were, funny enough, the guys in charge. And that's where Israel found itself going wrong. Genocidal campaigns of conquest aside, which is another story. Israel rejects its God, chooses a warrior king. Israel became corrupted. They took their eye of the ball and looked around to see if there was anything more exciting than the dreary headache of studying the word. Maybe there was a sexier way of gaining an understanding of the mind of God. Bored with trying to understand God's messages within creation, Israel decided it wanted a warrior king of its own to do the understanding for them. It got one, and within about 7 generations, they were ritually sacrificing their firstborn into the fires of a pathetic owl/bull god called Moloch. Under warrior kings, it doesn't take long before people are doing this kind of thing. A 1907 photo of the infamous Bohemian Grove staging a performance of the cremation of Care, a play still performed at this elitist club to this day. Some believe the play represents a modern day reenactment of Moloch worship, though there is no evidence that actual children have been sacrificed as part of the fun. Babylon and the love of money. The Saturn death cult would first come to public preeminence in ancient Babylon. There it learned one vital lesson in the pursuit of true power: control the issue of money. The link between drugs and war. During the early part of the Bronze Age of man, a less than heroic pursuit dominated the development of trade in the ancient world. The insidious trade in opium had regained its footing in the Anatolia region, where a bunch of warrior kings were acting like modern-day drug cartels, warring over who should control the lucrative trade routes between Asia and the Western kingdoms. The most powerful cartel was called the Troy Cartel, but it was being seriously challenged by the upstart Agamemnon Cartel. The battle lines were drawn, and the ensuing narco war engulfed the region for the next 10 years. The war only came to an end as a result of another planetary intervention, probably the same one that had allowed the Israelites to get out from under the Egyptians. However, the key development coming out of this conflict were the sudden advancements being made in weapons manufacture. New technologies allowed for greater kill ratios, and certain illuminated ones quickly realized the value in promoting an arms trafficking industry as a means to ensuring ever higher body counts for their ongoing blood sacrifice rituals. The penny had dropped. War as an expression of blood sacrifice was the new trend. An industry started to grow around the concept, with the development of military technology being a feature of the West, while a concentration of the art of war through strategy characterized the Eastern approach. Both resulted in the same thing: people got killed and the blood flowed. For the blue bloods and the illuminated ones of the various occult secret societies and mystery schools, everything was now as it should be. The warrior kings were happy. The lawyers and scribes charged with institutionalizing the various rituals were happy, as were the growing merchant class that was making a comeback after the Babel meltdown. The slaves were worked and the people were taxed. and the victims of the seemingly endless rituals sustaining this happy state of affairs, they were neither happy or unhappy, they were dead. The Saturn death cult and monetary control. Roughly 600 years after the cosmic events at Sodom and Gomorrah and the Exodus, even the sporadic marauding runs by the planets Mars and Venus seem to have come to an end, and all seemed well. But something was missing in the greater scheme of things as far as the illuminated ones were concerned. They were still hankering for a return to the debt-based slavery system of Babel as the core economic model for mankind. A tweaking of strategy had to be carefully considered if they were to have total control over the affairs of man. While war had already been a source of blood-soaked satisfaction for the elite's ritualistic needs, it was in the actual promotion of increasingly more contrived and barbaric wars that certain illuminated ones found an answer to killing two birds with one stone, pun intended. Since the time of the Trojan narco conflict, it had been recognized that the casualties of war could be exploited for ritualistic satisfaction. But to date, capitalizing on these deaths had only been opportunistic at best. The key to a consistent supply of guaranteed bloodshed was to be found in the notion of warfare being an ongoing manufacturer to order enterprise, and that would require money. As a result, and galvanized into action by promises of expanded material wealth and power, a rash of warrior kings made their first manipulated yet bloody steps toward the concept of empire. Carefully selected dates in accordance with now well-established blood rituals were chosen for them to initiate multiple wars of conquest. The happy results of these wars, as anticipated by illuminated powers, was the immense scaling up of their blood sacrifice needs, while their warrior king puppets sank ever deeper into financial debt. The equation was simple. War needs money, and borrowed money to pay for wars equals debt. Debt equals slavery. If a kingdom could be manipulated into accepting debt, then that would make it a kingdom of slaves. The power to enslave whole kingdoms was in being the one who was owed that debt. However, this was only guaranteed if you controlled the issuance of the money borrowed by the warrior kings in first place. In the Near East, at a place called the Plains of Dura, some highly positioned and privileged illuminated ones got busy. Babylon, the financial center of the ancient world. This image by an unknown artist shows the two real estate projects most associated with Babylon, its hanging gardens and the infamous Tower of Babel. The financial rise of Babylon. The warrior king of a growing city-state called Babylon had recently enjoyed a series of spectacular conquests. Babylon was now an empire, and its own cadre of mystery schools and secret societies held great public influence and renown. Through their overt ritual-based control of the warrior king Nebuchadnezzar, these illuminated ones conspired to erect a golden image that would dominate the plains of Dura. Essentially, this was the world's first financial gold standard, and Dura was Babylon's answer to the modern Federal Reserve System of the United States. Anybody not adhering to this gold standard in matters of trade and commerce within Babylon was to be ruthlessly exterminated by a fiery death. The temples once again started to issue money as a debt on their own behalf against this new gold standard. These same temples, controlled by the illuminated ones, quickly became rich in great public ceremonies celebrating the success of the new financial system was only marred by a mysterious upsurge in the disappearance of Babylonian children. The almost forgotten Israelites, their own warrior king experiment, such a dismal failure that they were now captives of the Babylonian Empire, had a serious problem with this golden image. See the Bible's book of Daniel, chapter 3. The biblical prophet Daniel was one of the main Hebrew adversaries to the establishment of a financial Babylonian gold standard. The Hebrew understanding of commerce and trade denounced the issue of money as a debt as being nothing more than criminal usury, an abominable practice according to their own priesthood, who had somehow survived the deprivations of their own warrior kings and corrupt secret societies. These Israelite priests organized a financial boycott of the new financial system, and the Babylonian gold standard started to fall apart. The illuminated ones of the Babylonian mystery schools never forgave the Israelites for their stubborn refusal to bend to the dictates of Babylon's gold standard. They plotted a vicious revenge against these former slaves from Egypt, only to be thwarted at the time by the more pressing needs of dealing with the arrival of deadly Persian warrior kings and later a rampant Greek demigod by the name of Alexander. The fall of Babylon. The Saturn death cult goes underground. Babylon fell quickly, its great gold standard experiment nipped in the bud. In one night, Babylon ceased to be its own master, and its illuminated ones joined their Israelite nemesis as fellow captives in their own city. Their golden image now laying in ruins, the remnants of Babylon's secret societies and mystery schools melted away into the desert night to be reborn as Mystery Babylon. Banished into an economic and political wilderness, they determined never to have their ambitions exposed to the harsh light of public scrutiny again. Casting their eyes elsewhere for a new home, Mystery Babylon soon settled its gaze on a new and frighteningly iron-willed people who were starting to make their presence felt. Carefully, they drew their plans, gathered their wares, and moved to Rome. The Iron Age of man was about to begin in all its terrifying darkness and luxuriant decadence. Saturn Death Cult Part 2, a beast with iron teeth and iron claws. In this second part to the Saturn death cult story, the focus must now be placed on the emergence of Rome as the dominant Western power. Rome represents the Iron Age of man and is still the primary influence on much of the Western world. Today's efforts by the elite to bring about a new world order can be directly traced to its origins in Rome. The Roman system can be characterized as a veritable beast with legs of iron and razor sharp steel claws intent on devouring everything in its path as it stumped its influence on history's head. If we don't understand Rome and its enormous capacity to organize death and misery on an industrial scale, then we will barely be able to recognize the events that shape this current Iron Age of man. The Roman Empire was the first true world power to assert itself on the global stage as a republic. This meant that the abstract concept of the law governed. Not a warrior king or a priest king or any variant thereof was to be in charge. Democracy, that weak-kneed rule of the mob concept championed by Greek oligarchs and their effete philosophers, was also off the cards. Rome served the law, and the law was supreme, the ultimate unifying factor in what it was to be Roman. All were subject to it, especially slaves. Despite its powerful and beastly visage, the day-to-day issues of running an empire brings its own problems even for a republic as virile as Rome. These problems could be summed up in one eternally sordid word: money. A seemingly endless series of pissing contests with a pesky Phoenician offshoot called Carthage had left the young Roman Republic virtually bankrupt. Further, a propensity for public entertainment by blood sports and savagely cruel execution spectacles had also placed a strain on Roman coffers. Then, in a series of attacks on Rome's sense of self-importance, the highly inconvenient Spartacus slave revolt nearly brought it to its financial needs. Mystery Babylon and its illuminated ones looked on from the shadows, recognized the signs, and salivated. Being a religious people, Rome had its fair share of temples dedicated to the now truly mythical pantheon of gods that had been born during the cosmic upheavals of the Golden Age. Today we refer to Rome, but Rome's citizens knew their city by the name Saturnus. Yet, while Saturn was honored, Jupiter was Rome's man in the heavens, and hidden deep within Jupiter's temples were the same old variations of the ancient secret societies and mystery schools, complete with well-honed sex ritual initiations and a love for blood-spattered sacrifices. Rome hadn't existed during either the Silver Age or Golden Age, and whatever vestige of learned truth could be gleaned from the old myths was quickly buried under an avalanche of twisted Saturnian type sex blood rituals straight out of Mystery Babylon's playbook. All that had to be done was to adapt the rituals to the now almighty Jovian god, Jupiter. So Rome was ripe for the occult picking. But what was truly needed to advance Mystery Babylon's ambitions was a good old-fashioned warrior king. It had to be a wannabe blue blood, someone who could make themselves bigger than Rome's law and wield the kind of power that would open the gates back onto the path of real power for Mystery Babylon. Once again, they needed someone willing to give them the right to issue money as a usurious debt, but this time while they remained hidden behind the scenes. Enter Julius Caesar, exit the Republic. Here's a quote from one observer back in the day. When a government becomes powerful, it is destructive, extravagant, and violent. It is an usurer which takes bread from innocent mouths and deprives honorable men of their substance for votes with which to perpetuate itself. Cicero, 54 BC. The line of pathological tyrants spawned by Rome's first emperor was the perfect tonic for the illuminated keepers of a now very twisted and thoroughly corrupted Saturnian legacy. New heights of political debauchery and financial oppression were unleashed on the Roman population, along with a constant stream of ritualistic bloodletting wars of suppression on the peoples of its empire. The iron fist of Rome crushed all before it and tended to do so only in accordance with those dates as dictated by the increasingly bizarre and bloody rituals of the now Jupiter-obsessed elite. Jupiter, Saturn, did it really matter which you chose as supreme deity when the reality was that both names simply represented humanistic personifications of the claim to rule by divine right? It was the ultimate in personality cults. If you observed and enacted the correct death rituals with the right type of people, then you became a quasi-god complete with the same rights a god enjoyed over life and death. The allure was that the legacy of divine authority in both the name of Saturn and Jupiter was yours to be had by simply engaging in an ascending program of objectionable sex murder rites. The trouble was, your average Nero and Caligula really believed this excrement. The heavens become quiet, mankind becomes violent. The skies over Rome and the whole world now no longer showed even the remotest evidence of the terrible calamities that had gone before. Mankind had entered into a state of amnesia on that score, and the carefully recorded memories of these celestial events had become antiquated religious myths in the minds of the broader public. These mythologies, in turn, were now corrupted beyond any hope for truth by the sick rituals of those who claimed to be the custodians of their hidden secrets. A deep-seated lie now stalked the corridors of Roman power, looking to devour any ambitious enough to enter public service. Suspiciously, one class of people seemed to thrive in this environment, the merchant banker class. The quasi-religious war juggernaut that was imperial Rome was now stuck in the familiar cycle of debt. More war followed by more debt, then more war, and so on. Thanks to the Julian dynasty, the issuance of money within the empire was now firmly in the hands of Mystery Babylon and its Roman stooges, where a silver-backed system of finance operated in place of the old gold standard system that had been practiced in Babylon. It was, however, the same debt-based slavery system developed back in the days of Babel, for it seems there is nothing new under the sun when it comes to the capacity of nations to fall for this scam time and time again. Rome's money troubles. Though the most powerful beast in human history, Rome was still dependent on the flow of money for its lifeblood. In the firm grip of a financial system dating back to Babylon, the Roman war machine was grinding to a halt under an enormous debt burden, and questions were being asked in the empire's furthest reaches. To sustain its cycle of debt and war, Rome had to constantly expand and swallow up ever more peoples and territory. As a result, and quite understandably, the peoples at the periphery of the empire were becoming ever more impatient with this policy. The first signs of real trouble had raised its head in the distant Roman province of Judea during the start of the Julian succession of emperors. At the center of it was what else? A temple. A minor event by Roman standards, it seems a certain Judean decided to physically assault the merchant bankers operating out of the main temple in Jerusalem and then declare he was the Son of God come to rescue the lost sheep of the house of Israel. By sheep, we can safely assume he meant people, but his actions in beating up and chucking out the merchant bankers caused a major furor amongst the locals. 3 years later, he was executed for his troubles, but left a smallish band of supporters who continued to preach, amongst other things, that the love of money is the root of all evil. At the time, the Romans hardly took any notice of what was to them a squabble between rival priest factions for the control of a minor one-god temple. They had bigger things to worry about and bigger temples to prove it. However, a short 32 years later, and the Romans had a full-blown uprising on their hands. Typically, the Romans believed they had to make an absolute example out of this rebellious province, and in the most brutal way possible. The temple at the center of Judean life and resistance was utterly destroyed, with documents from the era suggesting atrocities on a scale unheard of, with whole populations succumbing to barbaric acts of what today would be called genocidal ethnic cleansing. Back in Rome, the blood sacrifice junkies purred and the merchant bankers cashed in. In the meantime, the nearly forgotten followers of the anti-Baker Judean quietly dispersed themselves throughout the Roman world while Rome got back to the business of being Rome. Unfortunately, the business of being Rome meant dealing with an extremely overstretched frontier. The debt burden incurred in the defense and maintenance of Rome's borders grew and grew, and as always in this now familiar pattern, started to implode under its own weight. Rome had reached the limits of its ability to expand, and as such could no longer service its debt to the merchant banker families that were now the true power in the empire. Then it started to happen again, just as it had during the lead up to the catastrophe during the Tower of Babel epoch. The original Roman silver standard that defined the coin of the realm was debased to help pay for the crushing debt owed to the merchant banker class. This set off the inevitable bout of hyperinflation that always follows when a currency is no longer trusted to hold the value it's supposed to have. People simply stopped trusting that a Roman coin actually contained the stated amount of precious metal it was supposed to be made up of. Exacerbating this was the self-serving actions of the merchant bankers, illegally clipping and filing off the precious metals contained in the increasingly debased currency. Everybody got in on the act, and soon Rome's all-important trade tributaries started to grind to a halt. The economic crises of the 3rd century was one of history's most destructive. It provided the backdrop for a series of socio-economic changes that would affect the world for millennia. Though the imperial Rome of the Caesars would struggle on for another 2 centuries in one form or another, its days as a vibrant power were numbered, and what became known as the Dark Ages stood poised to fill the void. The rise of the Nicolaitans. The parasitic nature of Mystery Babylon's debt based financial system was eating Rome out from the inside. No amount of murderous rituals seemed to help, and yet, because Mystery Babylon's debt based monetary system is nothing more than a parasite, it couldn't help itself in slowly killing its host. The only way for a parasite to survive is to find a new host. But where could Mystery Babylon go now? Luckily for Mystery Babylon and its dependent illuminated ones, it was during this economic turmoil that the stage was being set for the rise of a new breed of priest kings. They were to come out of the ranks of a long forgotten and ancient priesthood, still struggling to keep the flame of Golden Age values alive. At the height of the Roman monetary crisis, a small group of practically minded priests called Nicolaitans claimed a controlling stake in a small yet highly committed band of proselytes. These proselytes were the heirs to a tradition that extolled the virtues of a Silver Age priesthood called the Order of Melchizedek. The Nicolaitan approach to the teachings of this Melchizedekian order was as clear as it was concise. Promoting Melchizedekian values would be handled as a marketing exercise, and to achieve this, you needed committed professionals. The Nicolaitans considered themselves consummate professionals. In short, what the Nicolaitans were proposing was that they would take on the job of being professional priests with a mandate to speak on God's behalf for a fee, of course. The well-meaning amateurs that had preciously run things could no longer cut it in a world where the chances of economic survival for any priesthood were going to hell in a basket. The traditional writings and Melchizedekian values that the Nicolaitans had now successfully appropriated for themselves was, of course, the fledgling religion of Christianity. From the shadows of the Roman monetary crisis, certain illuminated ones looked on with interest. The first act in a series of acts designed to expand Nicolaitan influence was nothing short of a stroke of marketing genius. The spiritual head and main teacher of the Melchizedek order was, at the time, the very same Judean that had assaulted the merchant bankers in the old temple at Jerusalem some 200 years before. Though long since vanished from the scene, his collected thoughts and insights were central to the priesthood's sense of validity. The Judean was noted to have propounded certain teachings that echoed the principles of justice and righteousness of the Golden Age. He drew his moral authority from values closely related to that time. The difficulty was that he didn't have a very marketable image, something the Nicolaitans recognized would be a problem if they were to successfully sell the idea that he represented their right to speak on behalf of the Supreme Creator. In fact, there was a total dearth of exploitable information about the man. There were no physical descriptions, surviving contemporary portraits, or even preliminary sketches from which to build a personality cult around this Judean. No one knew what the guy had really looked like, which was deemed important in a culture heavily influenced by physical beauty and presence. The plethora of semi-naked and impossibly perfectly proportioned statues that abounded throughout the empire were the fashion magazine covers of the day. Beauty was in, and you had better be good looking or at least well dressed if you were going to catch the public's eye. Nothing in the Judeans' legacy seemed to point to anything remotely marketable. The Nicolaitans pondered this problem and eventually turned to brainstorming on the Judean's name as a possible solution. His name had been Yeshua. Today, in modern English, his name would be Joshua. In his native tongue, the Judean's name contained a Yah, which could mean Lord or God, depending on the context. The Nicolaitans liked this, but had trouble finding a linguistic link to the supreme Roman name of Jupiter. Obviously, in a Roman world where Jupiter was the recognized Lord of heaven and all above, it would have been better if this Yeshua had been named Jupiter. After all, he did claim to be the Son of God, and wasn't Jupiter none other than the son of the first supreme god Saturn? But this Yah thing didn't fit the bill and was a bit too obscure for the majority of the Roman Empire, who spoke mainly Latin or Greek. Then someone had the bright idea of mixing both the Yah and the Judean's name with the Jupiter title, which gave you Yahpater. This was quite rightly dismissed as ridiculous, but they had a sense they might be onto something. And then it hit them: Zeus. Zeus was the Greek equivalent of Jupiter and a simple juxtaposition of the Yah, with Zeus rendered a name that effectively denoted its bearer as Lord Zeus. What you had was Yah Zeus, which became Yes, Yes, and eventually morphed into Jesus. Again, certain illuminated ones looked on from the shadows and smiled at this brazen act of linguistic alchemy. Jesus, or Lord Zeus, was something they could work with. They particularly liked the image of the bloody Jesus suffering in agony while hanging from an old-fashioned Roman instrument of execution. There was definite blood ritual potential there. In the meantime, life in the Roman Empire was becoming dire. This formerly iron-willed beast was looking decidedly rusty. A gang of northern barbarians agreed, and soon they were ransacking the empire's frontiers at will. But as seems to be the case in history, cometh the hour, cometh the man. Constantine the Great would mark the last time imperial Rome would enjoy the rule of a true warrior king. It would also mark the beginnings of the Nicolaitans' rise from obscurity to reestablishing a priest king as ruler over the known world. The resurrection of a beast wounded unto death. Constantine's legacy is mostly associated today with establishing the young religion of Christianity as Rome's official state religion. The Nicolaitans immediately set about transforming their newfound status into a formal organization. Naturally, it took on the shape of Rome's hierarchical structure, with scarlet, the color of blood, becoming its chosen fashion statement. A hard corpse of illuminated ones signed up and blended in nicely with the new color scheme. Unfortunately, Constantine didn't live forever, and Rome petered out in the face of a series of invasions, most notably those of the Hunnish Huns. With the old empire now split between East and West, Rome's burgeoning travails did provide one definite high point for its new one God state religion, now known as the Church. Its leader, in an act of undoubted courage, managed to personally persuade the Hun warrior king, Attila, into rethinking his plans for the sacking the imperial capital. Rome rejoiced in Christianity, basked in the glory of introducing to the world its latest and destined to be greatest priest king, the Pope. The beast that was imperial Rome eventually died, mortally wounded to the head, when its system of government completely failed by the late 5th century. Its corpse lay rotting in the dying embers of civilization as a series of lesser non-Roman kingdoms squatted its former royal status. Under the circumstances, it would have been thought that the Pope and his church would have died along with Rome, a casualty of the ebb and flow of history. But then, as if by magic, the beast seemed to resurrect itself, its mortal wound healed, and a new look head, now smiling coldly out into the gathering gloom of the Dark Ages. By taking the best organizational features of the old imperial system and adapting them to an increasingly ritual-based religion, the priest king Pope and his newly modeled Holy Roman Empire was now ready to open shop. The church was now fully open for business. With their usual panache for spotting a good marketing idea, the Nicolaitans had been steadily refining a new set of rituals designed to initiate the broader public in under the control of their recently elevated supreme priest king. They efficiently opened up to the masses a chance to really partake in the ceremonial aspects of getting closer to God. Unsurprisingly, the blood sacrifice element of the Judeans' execution a few centuries before was now emphasized as the main ritualistic requirement for prospects looking to benefit from church membership. As everyday ordinary people were invited to step forth and take the new sacraments of faith, references to drinking Jesus' blood and eating his flesh caused knowing winks of understanding to pass between secretly observing illuminated ones. In fact, the illuminated ones immediately recognized the potential of this variation on the old blood rituals of Jupiter and Saturn for attracting up and coming warrior kings. It was Mystery Babylon's age old way of trapping those looking for legitimacy to bolster their claims to the divine right to rule. Initially hurt by the collapse of their host economy in the 3rd century, Mystery Babylon's illuminated ones quickly set about positioning themselves to provide finance for the new priest king pope. Money would lubricate the wheels of influence, and warrior kings would once again dance to their debt slavery tune. The illuminated church. The church now enjoyed the authority and money to sanction whichever warrior king it deemed most beneficial to its own aims and purposes. Great coronation ceremonies were performed with the Pope anointing his chosen ones using variations of the now familiar Saturnian and Jovian rituals, and the people couldn't get enough. Charlemagne, Otto the Great, and Barbarossa were just some of the luminaries sanctified as genuine blue bloods by the all-powerful priest king pope. Once the formal yet sanitized blood rituals had been performed by the benefit of an ignorant public, illuminated ones would lead the newly crowned blue bloods away to initiate them into the real stuff behind the scenes. As the Middle Ages ground on, children started to disappear in ever greater numbers. Of course, mass blood sacrifices in the form of useless wars continued to be a feature under the Holy Roman Empire, just as it had been under the old imperial order. These were Christian wars of the cross or crusades, and they didn't stop with attacks on those holding the old Holy Land of Palestine. Any perceived enemy of the church, and therefore the Nicolaitans, who had land to be seized, was deemed worthy of the attentions of a crusade, the bloodier the better. True to form, Mystery Babylon continued its work behind the scenes. A pace and particularly sordid event during the Crusades goes to illustrate the symbiotic relationship between money and power and the role of the merchant banker class in subverting the authority of even an institution that had become as powerful as the church. With its power base now fully consolidated in the great trading city-states of Florence and Genoa, Mystery Babylon's illuminated ones continued to promote arms trafficking, the ancient drug trade of Sodom and Gomorrah, and a trade in slaves. Monies from these dubious activities was reinvested into the practice of money lending at rates of usurious interest, thus allowing the merchant bankers to establish great houses of commerce through the laundering of drug and arms trafficking profits. It was a highly convenient commercial model that was to last in one form or another up till the present day. The slave trade, both its sexual and indentured variants, played a vital role in funding the acquisition of drugs from Mystery Babylon's Far Eastern contacts. These contacts were so sophisticated that it was believed by some of the most impressionable crusaders that the Holy Roman Empire enjoyed a secret relationship with a nominally Christian kingdom hidden deep in the depths of Asia. The kingdom was thought to be the domain of one Prester John, and it was hoped by the naive cannon fodder of the cross that he would soon join them in their campaigns to defeat the Muslim caliphate. Come, his opium, however, did. Though the Holy Roman Empire's economy was now very dependent on the financially lubricating effects of arms and drug trafficking, it was still difficult for the Pope to look the other way when confronted by some of the Mystery Babylon's more egregious and unchristian activities. The enduring legacy of the anti-banker doctrines of Jesus were still an important part of the papal claim to divine legitimacy, a factor not lost on some card-carrying Christians who were finding it increasingly difficult to reconcile the church's pronouncements with its actions. So when a crowd of some 30,000 children took up the improbable call to travel to the Holy Land and convert the Muslim infidels with love, things did not sit well with the general public when these kids were promptly sold into slavery by the very same merchant bankers the church was now heavily indebted to. The merchant bankers didn't really understand what all the fuss was about, but a few warrior kings, themselves heavily in debt to these creatures, certainly did understand the implications and quickly realized it as an opportunity to morally extricate themselves from Mystery Babylon's growing web of debt-based financial slavery. Events came to a head, and the illuminated ones were caught napping on an auspicious Friday the 13th, when the church and the debt-riddled warrior king of France made their move on one of Mystery Babylon's flagship enterprises, the Knights Templar. The church accused the Templars of, amongst other things, obscene rituals and homosexuality, and the true motive for the attack is evident in the charges of financial corruption, fraud, and secrecy. Ironically, and considering their responsibility for so many contrived wars substituting as blood sacrifice rituals, the illuminated ones suddenly found themselves the target of a church-inspired blood sacrifice ritual called the Albigensian Crusade. They quickly retreated underground, some by burying themselves in the deepest recesses of the church itself, while others took up the quiet life of respectable mystery school adepts practicing the art of funny handshakes. Deep within the shadows, though, the sex rituals and murder rites continued as a new wave of secret societies were established to carry Mystery Babylon's torch. The church understood this, and emboldened by their successes against the Knights Templar, went on to purge illuminated ones from amongst existing blue bloods now dependent on the church for their privileged positions. Chief amongst those purged was a particularly loathsome blue blood called Gilles de Rais, or Gilles de Rais. A serial murderer of hundreds of children, Gilles de Rais was the former brother-in-arms to the convicted and now dead witch Joan of Arc. An exceedingly wealthy man in his own, exposed for the demonic sadistic killer that he was in private. At the height of his trial, he was revealed that this horrific penchant for the torture, mutilation, and murder of children was actually the pretext for ritualistic rites with strong occult themes. A thoroughly revolted public expressed its abject horror over the affair, and the illuminated ones found themselves going into full damage control. See Ritual Child Murder Part 1 for more on Gilles de Rais. However, the Gilles de Rais episode turned out to be a hidden blessing for the illuminated agenda. The church's gambit began to backfire when doubt started to surface amongst Gilles de Rais' blue blood brethren as to whether or not the priest king pope had overstepped the mark. The newly established underground secret societies of the illuminated ones began to see a surreptitious increase in membership from the ranks of the nobility, while children continued to disappear in ever greater numbers. By this time, it's hoped the reader will have noticed the clear connection between the activities of ritual-based secret societies and the growing trend in disappearing children down through the ages. It is important to understand this connection because we now come to that part of the story in which the ever bizarre nature of the elitist agenda and its Saturnian legacy serves to launch what is the modern age. With the wholesale destruction of what had been the Knights Templar and the subsequent purging of various illuminated ones throughout the Holy Roman Empire, a watershed in relations had been reached between the powers of Mystery Babylon and the Nicolaitan-dominated institution of the priest king pope. The merchant bankers had grown restless under the threat of papal retribution and believed it was high time to reassert themselves like they had once done on the plains of Dura and Old Babylon. With this as our backdrop, we now move to view the consequences of what the history books call the Great Inquisition and the subsequent Reformation and Counter-Reformation periods. In the context of this story, these periods mark the beginnings of a push the concerted push by the hidden powers that be to reestablish the notion of a global society based on occult and alchemical traditions dating to the Babel epoch. The day of the nation state was about to dawn in the age of iron. This then is the subject of part 2 in this darkly fascinating journey that is the Saturnian legacy. A whole new world of pain. It's estimated as many as 50 million people were put to death as a consequence of the church's Holy Inquisition. The realization that a whole new world existed beyond the horizon was a welcome revelation to a power-hungry church, but an apocalypse to its inhabitants. Through the organized butchery of vast swaths of the European population in the name of its Jovian corrupted Melchizedekian values, the Nicolaitans had thought to maintain their position at the top of the Christian food chain. The threat posed by a variant interpretation of their Christian doctrines, Protestantism, was really no threat at all to the Jovian status quo because Protestants had their own gang of Nicolaitans who still clung to the essentials of a Jovian-inspired Christianity. However, the period known as the Inquisition proved to be one giant Nicolaitan bloodbath that only served to weaken the overall authority of the church as it headed towards its greatest test yet. The modern industrial age and its alarmingly noisy machines lay just over the horizon, and the hard work being put in by Mystery Babylon was starting to pay off. Crucial to progress in the march to an industrial age was the growing need for energy to drive newfangled contraptions that were boosting farm production. At first, the issue was to produce more food to feed the growing population of Europe as it recovered from the twin deprivations of the Inquisition and a deadly plague remembered as the Black Death. But the underlying issue was the control of the land on which food could be grown. The energy required to drive machines meant access to resources was essential, and access to resources meant having access to larger tracts of land. Land costs money, especially if you are going to develop it. The illuminated ones recognized an opportunity, and control over the new facet of land acquisition and energy production was added to their ever-expanding portfolio of enterprises. They carefully invested in voyages of exploration in search of new lands and set back in the expectation of increased profits. Best of all, with the church currently occupied with its internecine Catholic Protestant debt struggle, the illuminated ones were free to engage in whatever form of government they could impose in any new lands that came under the influence of their ritually controlled warrior kings. That is, until the advent of one of those game-changing events that tends to set warrior kings off into cannibalistic feeding frenzies of lethal wars of conquest, the discovery of gold. Over the generations, a few people from the old world had been kind of aware of the existence of the new world for thousands of years. The Nicolaitans only became aware of it just over 500 years ago. They had a bit of catching up to do and determined early on that their influence would quite naturally be forcibly established among the curiously heathen types that populated this new world. When the discovery of gold became a part of the New World equation, the Nicolaitans found themselves scrambling to keep control of events. warrior kings sworn to uphold the authority of the church started attacking warrior kings sworn to uphold the authority of the church, who in turn were attacked by warrior kings sworn to uphold the authority of the church. Amidst all the unauthorized attacking, the idea of what church authority exactly stood for started to break up in favor of a feverish trust in the authority of gold. And with so much gold now flooding into the old world from the new, previously stable economy started to suffer the inevitable imbalances brought about by consequent price inflation. The church sought to arrest the situation and decreed that since all the gold in all the world was God's, it was by implication the church's. But nobody really heard that one, and the Pope would eventually be forced to up the ante by claiming his edicts were infallible. So they had better listen. By the time the Pope and the Nicolaitans had resorted to that tactic, the church had become virtually irrelevant, and it was all according to plan. You see, the rape and pillage of the New World and its gold reserve continued unabated, with droves of people upping stakes from under the church and making a move to pastures more golden. But the real consequences, masked by this demographic shift, was almost entirely hidden to mainstream history. The Nicolaitans missed it completely, and your average warrior king hadn't a clue as to what they were looking at when it came to the New World. All they could see was gold and land. Only the illuminated ones fully understood the implications of what was hidden in plain sight, and it would forever change their approach to sex blood ritual as a control mechanism in a world now fully entering into the age of machines. A worldwide earthquake and a harlot's fall. The wholesale destruction of the existing New World cultures found by the European settlers failed to hide images of a pre European American civilization. Now rotting away in the fetid jungles and high mountain passes of Central and South America, the savage Saturnian imagery of human sacrifice is plain to see, and it points to a disturbing origin shared by all. As the infamous conquistadors crawled over the shattered ruins of the Aztec and Inca empires looking for every speck of gold they could lay their hands on, they barely noticed the wealth of hidden history staring back at them in the form of Mayan and Aztec hieroglyphics and artworks. They took comfort from their Nicolaitan monks that they were plundering, that what they were plundering was all just pagan rubbish of the lowest and most barbaric order. However, along for the ride were the usual cabal of hidden illuminated ones who had careful notes and observations and interviewed some of the surviving native nobility as to what had been going on in the Americas before the savage invasions of Cortez and Pizarro. The stories they collected revealed a dominant theme that spread the length of the peoples of the Sorry about that. Okay. So the ancient peoples of the Americas had been practicing the same Saturnian type blood rituals whose origins dated all the way back to the Silver Age and possibly beyond. But what did it mean? Reports were sent back to the various old world secret societies, and after an orgy of ritualistic investigations, their highest adepts found themselves plunging headlong into a journey of renewed illuminated knowledge. What they had in the form of clearly identifiable New World ritual practices was evidence of a worldwide Saturn based religion that predated the Nicolaitan Creed of Jovian inspired worship. In a world where generations of illuminated ones had blended the key ritual aspects of Saturn and Jupiter worship while successfully imprinting its influence on the corrupted Nicolaitan creed of Christianity, it dawned on the current crop of illuminated ones that they had the perfect solution to undermining the authority of the church once and for all. With the evidence of pre Christian Saturnian worship in the New World, the secret societies could now initiate chosen elites into an undeniable half truth. The secret origins of Christianity were to be found in the higher truths of a more ancient and more widely accepted worship of Saturn, or Saturn had seniority over Jesus. Flushed with a renewed vigor of purpose, a new harvest of blue blood recruits were quickly initiated into the new secrets of the secret societies. Those who came to know the truth of Christianity's dubious Saturnian origins easily recognized the impact it had on the already deteriorating authority of the church and its implications on who would hold the reins of power in the modern age. But blue bloods were proving an intellectually dull lot, largely due to their incessant practice of intermarriage within their own select bloodlines. They liked the idea of a less powerful church meddling in their affairs, but had unfortunately become comfortable with achieving objectives by applying the principle of it pleases me for it to be so. This was hardly the approach the illuminated ones had in mind when it came to successfully challenging the church on an intellectual level with an alternative claim to authority. Being dependent on forwarding their objectives through society's privileged classes, Mystery Babylon's more clued up adepts realized that the predominance of inbreed blue bloods and nobility within their ranks represented a crisis of leadership. After careful consideration and a subsequent upsurge in child disappearances, it was reluctantly determined by the illuminated ones that the long-term objectives of Mystery Babylon could only be realized by new blood being brought into the equation. It was deemed necessary to tap the raw intellectual resources latent in the former masses of human chattel that they had so coldly preyed upon before. Only in this way could they finally break away from the clutches of church control and forge a new vision for a post Christian world. However, due to education being the centuries old prerogative of the church and the blue blood classes, the greater masses of Europe's population enjoyed only rudimentary intellectual skills in the art of thinking. Though some had developed a self awareness independent of the church, some people were often barbecued for their troubles, and the masses took the hint of sticking to only looking at the pictures. Undeterred, an effort was made by the illuminated ones through Mystery Babylon's moneyed classes to stimulate educational pursuits amongst the more promising elements of humanity. They put a special emphasis on the sciences, legal, and financial professions. However, the subsequent emergence of educated luminaries such as Galileo, Kant, and Isaac Newton would prove a double-edged sword in the march towards a reborn world dominated by an illuminated world religion and sustained by Mystery Babylon's debt slavery financial system. The two distinct successes to emerge from this policy, in illuminated terms, were the collected economic thoughts of a hard-bitten Scottish business mind in the form of one Adam Smith, and the philosophical wiles of a cleverly argumentative fellow by the name of George Wilhelm Frederick Hegel. While Adam Smith's magnum opus, The Wealth of Nations, outlined a rationale for an increase in global commerce as a good thing, Hegel concentrated on developing a philosophical technique termed Hegelian Dialectic. Hegel's dialectic could be used by illuminated ones to identify and then bring together two radically opposing points of view, and then use the ensuing conflict to manipulate both parties into a compromise beneficial to their illuminated aims and objectives. So, start a fight between two people, but make sure you collect the prize money. That about sums it up. In fact, it didn't take long for the illuminated ones to realize that Hegel's philosophy was a page taken right out of their old modus operandi, their blood-soaked agendas, including the drive for the control of global trade and commerce. As a philosophy, it was really just a very clear way of disguising a technique for outright political and social manipulation as a respectable topic for polite company. The Hegelian dialectical process began to be used as a powerful tool for creating the desired social and political changes needed to facilitate Mystery Babylon's long-term plans. A decidedly simple formula was put into operation in which all that the illuminated ones had to do was organize and finance one extreme viewpoint, the thesis, only to then secretly fund and present its counterpoint of view, the antithesis. The resulting conflict served to then herd the greater majority of the bewildered masses into accepting a prefabricated conflict resolution solution, the synthesis. This synthesis would, of course, be consistent with the objectives of the illuminated ones. In the period leading up to the modern era, both Adam Smith and Hegel's ideals were to lay the foundations for the financial and philosophical development of the two defining concepts that were to embody the modern mass industrialized age, the Faceless Corporation and the all-encompassing nation state. For those who could set up a corporation, it was a wonderful way to accumulate personal wealth without the burden of taking personal responsibility. In the meantime, the nation state concept forcibly corralled people into a false sense of owning a claim on a specific region's resources without ever actually having personal ownership or free access to those resources. Those ownership rights still belong to the former feudal blue blood masters, but they let you wave around a multicolored piece of cloth on special occasions to show you were now officially part of the team. Either way, both concepts proved a masterful means of transferring whatever wealth the many had into the hands of the few, with all the real work being done by the many. Not to be completely outdone, the Nicolaitans managed to make their own philosophical contribution to shaping the modern age in the dangerously eugenic-friendly beliefs of one Thomas Malthus, an Anglican clergyman who had way too much time on his hands. Convinced that modern progress would inevitably be stymied by producing too many mouths to feed, illuminated ones thoughtfully filed Malthus's theory under their future plans for useless eaters category and quietly stashed its implications away for a rainy day. The first effects of both Adam Smith and Hegel's concepts were to manifest themselves in a stupendous socio-political earthquake at the end of the 18th century that would see the church ruthlessly knocked from its position of power and the globe cleaved into three distinct spheres of control: old world, new world, and third world. Driving the move into this embryonic new world order would be the emergence of a new family of pseudo royals destined to become the financial lords of a powerfully resurgent mystery Babylon. as the world focused its eyes on a carefully constructed carousel of would-be world emperors and warrior king conquerors, it would almost completely miss the signature moves of the most important claimant to effective worldwide domination, the rise of the Red Shield. New Babylon Rising. Contrary to what the history books tell you, it was not Napoleon that stepped into the political and economic void created by the earth shaking events of the French Revolution. Rather, it was the cold, calculating financial acumen of a previously obscure family of money changers that took financial advantage of the power vacuum straddling the 18th and 19th centuries. In the greater scheme of things, Napoleon was yet just another warrior king in desperate need of a decent bank balance. He was the product of an age that saw the French aristocracy and the church's Nicolaitans finally lose their grip on both the political and economic control of Europe, as well as their actual heads. However, it would be the apocryphal act of Napoleon snatching the crown out of the startled Pope's hands and calmly place it on his own head that would signify to those in the know that the Nicolaitans were a spent force. The worldwide earthquake that was the late 18th century age of revolution and the consequent demise of the church had started in the unlikely setting of a new world backwater called Lexington. The following conflict between the American born descendants of indentured servants and the mercenary lackeys of the British elite quickly escalated into the birth of a new and entirely independent nation dubbed the United States of America. The American Revolutionary War of Independence, as it came to be forgotten by modern generations of Americans, was in reality a squabble over taxes. Naturally, at the center of it was the growing British Empire's inability to fund the debt it owed to a cabal of merchant bankers parked in the nation's capital of London. So the then British warrior king decided the American colonists would pay it. It proved to be one of the rare hiccups suffered by Mystery Babylon during that chaotic era. The true revolutionary aspect to what started on the village common at Lexington has to do with the way in which the colonists decided to keep their economy going in the face of increased tax demands from Britain. Having no other asset than the product of their own labors from the land on which they lived, the colonists did the unthinkable. They started to issue their own money against that very asset, and they had the temerity to issue it debt-free. It was a debt-free system of financing that was diametrically opposed to the debt-based financial model as practiced by Mystery Babylon and enforced by the Bank of England. And to the horror of Britain's banking elite, it seemed to be working. The resultant shockwaves that were felt across the Atlantic in the smugly secure offices of the London-based banking system were nothing short of a call to arms. Up to that moment, the merchant bankers of Britain had been complacently confident in their ability to perpetuate the same debt-based financial slavery system in the Americas that they currently enjoyed as a monopoly in Britain and on the continent. Sensing a serious threat to their financial monopoly, things were bound to get ugly and get ugly fast. The American experiment had to be stopped in its tracks before it infected the rest of the world. The French, in their revolutionary experiment, were, however, not so fortunate as to enjoy the same financial freedom that their American revolutionary cousins had. They too had reached the limit of their endurance, suffering under a corrupt money system abused by reality disconnected blue bloods and backed by insidious merchant bankers. In an explosion of typically flamboyant disgust, the French people stormed the Bastille, cut off their warrior king's head, and promptly found themselves at the mercy of a military dictatorship intent on canning its way to European conquest, financially backed by, you guessed it, merchant bankers and a national debt. You see, after the American debacle, Mystery Babylon had got their act together and were secretly funding both sides of the proverbial French Revolutionary coin in true Hegelian dialectic fashion. Napoleon got the synthesizing nod in the merchant banker's Machiavellian game of thesis versus antithesis, with the last remnants of Nicolaitan influence in France being forced to flee to a new life as religious tourist attractions in the newly formed Vatican city-state. Noteworthy in the financial power broking plays that brought about this new state of affairs were the efforts of a rising star in the ranks of Mystery Babylon's merchant banking class, a small European money changing family known in certain circles as the Red Shield. By the late 1700s, the Red Shield had also opened shop in the virtually autonomous banking capital of the British Empire, the City of London, where the local merchant banker houses were still reeling from the loss of the Americas to a debt-free money system. The Red Shield started funding the British government's response to the merchant banker manipulated antics of an excessively power hungry Napoleon, who was in turn being secretly funded by the French wing of the Red Shield, who were in turn also funding other elements looking to reestablish the old French blue blood clan that had lost its head, literally and figuratively, in the revolution, the very same that had been replaced by the Red Shield backed Napoleon. To top it all off, there was also yet more Red Shield financial support for a totally different group of blue bloods looking to usurp the original French blue bloods, trying to reclaim their throne in the advent of Napoleon losing his own head. No doubt about it, a growing number of illuminated ones started to acknowledge that these Red Shield guys played a dialectically good game, and soon Mystery Babylon's objectives were being trusted almost exclusively to the Red Shield sphere of operations. The Red Shield's moment of truth came in the wake of Napoleon's defeat by the joint British and Prussian forces at Waterloo. Already a major source of funding for the issuance of British government bonds, the London branch of the Red Shield manipulated British business interests into believing that Napoleon had in fact won on the field of Waterloo. A selling panic ensued, allowing the Red Shield to buy controlling stakes in the choicest British commercial enterprises for pennies on the pound before the true outcome at Waterloo filtered through. The Red Shield was now a made financial power in Britain and could exert huge influence over the policies of the Bank of England, the chief financial institution in the nation since 1694. Practitioners of endogamy, that quaint practice of marrying only within one's own family or ethnic group, the Red Shield were quintessential blue bloods in all but actual title. With their growing financial influence over Europe's waning blue blood and warrior king clans, the Red Shield were soon anointed as fellow blue bloods and initiated into the inner sanctums of the grand Saturnian truth. There they set about consolidating their position as a precursor to establishing outright and overall control of the dispensing and granting of illuminated wisdom. The Red Shield, determined to be the first of all brethren in a new world order born from the hidden machinations of a mystery Babylon that was virtually now synonymous with their own objectives. No longer bound to operating out of temples and through the religious frontages of spurious priesthoods, Mystery Babylon, through the work of the Red Shield, now felt confidence enough to begin creating its own temples dedicated to the worship of money as a means of control over each and every nation on the earth. Taking as their model the existing Bank of England, these temples are what we call today central banks. For the Red Shield, their greatest challenge would be the establishment of such a temple in the young nation of the United States of America. The founding of the Federal Reserve Bank of America through their merchant bank proxies in that country would be their crowning achievement to date. Guns, oil, drugs, and sex. Mystery Babylon had consolidated its hold on world finances and international trade by the end of the 19th century. The modern military industrial complex was born, and with it came an intensification of an age old scourge, white slavery. The role played by merchant bankers in the now incessant wars that plague the world in the age of nation state empires is by now a well understood facet of Mystery Babylon's operations. The origins of the modern military industrial complex of nation states can be directly traced to the famous maxim of renowned military strategist von Clausewitz that war is a mere continuation of politics by other means. Gun running was a way of ensuring the extension of politics by other means was a certainty. But it was the sudden thirst for energy in a rapidly industrializing world that saw the Red Shield and its cohorts consolidate their grip on the destiny of the Western world in the 19th century. The wood and coal burning days of the early Industrial Revolution gave way to a new source of energy that promised a massive increased energy output per unit that could not be matched by any other known fuel of the time. Best of all, this new energy source was locked away in the ground where only those with financial backing could tap it. We are, of course, talking about oil, the black gold that would fuel Mystery Babylon's quest for monopoly over the world's energy needs. One of the key tracts of land harboring this precious substance was the United States of America. Sensing an opportunity, the Red Shield invested its resources into the operations of a select group of merchant bankers in order to expand their influence into the new oil industry. The unsuspecting American populace with key individuals in the oil industry positioned to become some of the wealthiest individuals the world had ever seen. An era fondly remembered by illuminated ones as the Gilded Age. Men such as John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie would amass personal fortunes never to be seen again in modern times. With the military expansion of nation states providing a ready supply of stolen, drillable land for Red Shield's oil associates, the traditional blue blood elites of the old world started feeling a bit left out. In particular, the royal classes of blue bloods were becoming cash strapped in the wake of the rise of the Red Shield, and soon they turned their attentions back to an old cash cow that had proved such a reliable source of income for illuminated ones in the past: opium. The flagrantly criminal commercial enterprises known as the Opium Wars were nothing more than royal sanctioned drug dealing on a corporate scale that would not be matched until the CIA gave its backing to Colombian cocaine cartels in the later 20th century. The shocking disregard for the help of the Chinese people by representatives of the British East India Company should serve as a constant reminder as to the moral foundations of the modern corporate entity. The desire to maximize profit at the cost of human lives emphasizes the pathological nature of those promoting a globalized world trade system as the highest expression of human activity. The old world blue bloods were ecstatic, their financial fortunes restored. They were now content to play the landed elite where they could maintain their occult rituals from behind closed castle walls and await the dawning of a promised new Saturnian golden age in which they were assured a place of honor. For the Red Shield, the ongoing financial contributions of the international trade in drugs served to add lubrication to the channels through which their debt based money would flow into the economy in general. With guns, oil, and drugs now a prominent feature of the Mystery Babylon business model, we can turn to the role played by the trade in slaves in preserving that hidden knowledge of merchants' control over its expanding influence. The use of slaves as an energy source had largely been made redundant by the advances in oil driven machines that could do the work of 1,000 such slaves. Under the guise of freeing slaves from the iron shackles chaining them to the miseries of the plantations, the millions of Americans' African slaves were released and introduced to life under debt based money. In time, they would realize they had swapped one form of slavery for another, while in no way truly escaping the stigma of the plantation in polite society. But slavery had been a worldwide scourge for centuries, and its trade was well established in the Middle East and other parts of Asia and Africa. On the southern continent of the Americas, the plantation model of slavery persisted in the various forms to the present day. It was in the context of the activities of secret societies and mystery schools, though, that Mystery Babylon's continued interest in maintaining a slave trade was sustained. As the Red Shield's business interest expanded, it was accepted that an increasing amount of professional managers had to be employed to run the day-to-day operations of a now global system of commerce. The advantage in procuring such minions was that the inner circle of the Red Shield could continue to operate in relative obscurity as far as the general public was concerned. Where the slave trade came in handy was in its use as a blackmailing agent to control the minion class and ensure the job was being done to Red Shield specifications. What became known as white slavery allowed the illuminated ones of the Red Shield's inner circle to capitalize on the sexual deprivations of their minions as an entrapment should they ever think about breaking ranks. The entrapment technique employed by Mystery Babylon on its minion classes took the form of a subtly different mode of blood ritual utilizing the predominantly Christian heritages of its participants. The upsurge in satanic or Luciferian-based ritual activity during the later part of the 19th century was a carefully calculated minion-specific variant on existing Saturnian sex blood rituals. Its symbols were markedly different, but its murderous activities paralleled those of the illuminated ones. Luciferian and satanic rites promoted a powerful sexual incentive for those invited to join, and this was fed by a steady supply of expendable women and children gathered from the less fortunate sectors of society. While Satanism and Luciferianism effectively shielded the minions away from the true meaning of the Saturnian sex blood rituals practiced by their hidden masters, it did come to play another important role in the designs of the illuminated ones intent on bending the world to its version of an elite-controlled world state. By the mid to late 20th century, the frightening appearance of a social predator called the serial killer served the classic Hegelian dialectic purpose of herding a scared population into accepting ever more controls over their lives in the name of security. Where this rash of serial killers sprang from is pinpointed by the superb analysis of Dave McGowan in his book, Programmed to Kill. But that is another story for another time. Back in the waning years of the 19th century, a distinctly hidden and frighteningly real world of occult abuse now existed behind the facades of everyday life as experienced by the greater majority. The plunge into the most murderous century in human history was now a fait accompli. And my throat is dry, so we're going to end it here. Stay tuned for the next chapter, Nation State to World State. Thanks again for listening. Peace.